Hey there! Today I want to give you 5 tips about winter growing. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina in Zone 7B, and it is about a week after the winter solstice and am in prime time for winter growing. Now, winter growing has become my main season as I will be taking next summer off. So I have a lot of things in place here to help me with winter growing and really dial in my systems and operation and output and efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of things I want to share with you today that's going to help you with winter growing no matter where you are. And I know it's going to be a little bit different depending on if you're in a warmer place or a cooler place, but I can share with what's going on here, and this will be applicable to all different sizes, but mainly for market gardening. Probably the most obvious thing to recommend for winter growing is some sort of protection for your crops from the frost, cold weather, and winter precipitation and those kinds of things. Now you can do this with row cover and basic wire hoops, which I've done in the past. That is not my favorite method because I just can't stand row cover. It rips all the time and it's just a pain and a hassle. So one thing I really recommend, and I've said this in plenty of videos, are these caterpillar tunnels. And this video is not sponsored by Farmer's Friend, but these are the 14 by 100 foot Gothic Pro tunnels. I'll leave a link down below if you guys want to check them out. I highly recommend them, not just for winter production, but for all year round. And what they allow me to do is allow me to control the moisture and the temperature a lot better. Now these are unheated tunnels, so I'm not adding any heat, I'm not adding any light, I'm just using the weather and stuff that I have here. And if it does get very cold, what you can do is you can put row cover on the beds inside the tunnels, and that gives you another layer of protection, and that can be really handy. As of now, I have not had to do that. It's gotten down into the 20s a bunch of nights, but we don't have repeated frost for weeks and weeks on end. It'll be a couple days in a row, maybe a week in a row where it freezes at night and that kind of stuff. But one thing I've noticed to really help with that, because these are unheated, is to just make sure you close up the tunnels early enough in the day so you can trap some of the sunlight and trap some of the heat. And if you really warm up the soil, it will keep things a lot happier going through the night. And those are the things that are really important with the tunnels in terms of keeping the heat in. Now, one thing is really helpful is, if you get a lot of snow, this will keep your bed super, clean of snow, obviously. And having the pitched roof on the Gothic Pro really does help with shedding snow. Now, we don't get a lot of snow. We usually get one snowstorm a year, and it's really not a big deal. But I've noticed that even if heavy rain events and stuff like that, this has been absolutely crucial for keeping my crops protected and happy. And the other thing is just time, because if you're dealing with row cover on a lot of beds, that can take a lot of time taking the row cover on and off, securing it with weight and sandbags and stuff like that. This, I can open up the sides and get it ventilated. So covering your crops and having protection from the frost is super important. Let's talk about irrigation. Irrigation is really not crucial in the wintertime, and in fact, one thing you have to be careful about is having too much water and moisture in your tunnels, because it can cause problems. I very rarely irrigate in the wintertime. I do not use the overhead. In fact, I have just actually disconnected the overhead so it wouldn't freeze. But what I do use is the drip every couple of weeks. And I really make sure that the soil is dry. Like, I walk around and I put my hand in the soil and I look at the plants and I really make sure that it needs water, because I have in the past overwatered, and overwatering and creating too much moisture in your tunnels can cause problems. It causes a problem with fungal activity that can cause damage to your crops, and also with insect pressure. So the more humid it is in there, the more moist it is, and especially in these systems where we're growing a lot of vegetables very close together, you can have problems with fungal and disease and insect pressure. So you want to make sure you are keeping the moisture content down. So again, no overhead. I just use drip every once in a while. And in the third tunnel, I don't even have irrigation set up. So in there, I'm just hand watering as needed. And again, just checking and making sure. One thing you really want to do is make sure you limit the amount of moisture that's in your tunnels. And so what I recommend is that you vent your tunnels every day. You got to find at least a couple hours during the day, during the warmest part of the day, to open up the tunnels and let some of the moisture out. I do it every day because there's pretty much every day here it goes at least to around freezing, or maybe just above freezing, if not a little bit higher. And so I want to make sure I'm venting the tunnel to let the humidity and the moisture out and getting that air exchange. And I've had very low pest pressure so far this winter because of that, and it's been really helpful. Another thing about keeping the moisture level down is making sure that the crops have enough room around them. Let me show you something about lettuce. On continuation of the theme of keeping the moisture level down and keeping room around the plants, you can see how densely, stuff like lettuce is planted, or carrots or kale or stuff like that. And so what happens is when there's a lot of moisture in here, that's when you're getting the insects and the fungal pressure and disease and stuff like that. So after you harvest them, you want to make sure that you're going to try to keep them as healthy as possible, because one big benefit about winter growing is you get second, third, sometimes fourth and fifth cuts on certain things like lettuce if you're really careful. And because things grow so slowly, you really want to make sure that they are going to regrow. And one thing I do is after I harvest them, I just come around and I clean out the leaves that are around on the bottom. You don't want those sitting there rotting. You want to keep the airflow in there nice and dry. And so that's a huge thing to do, is just make sure that you're going through and taking off either dead or damaged leaves around the base. You want to make sure that the air can get in, and that's a big thing, is just airflow in your tunnels and keeping the humidity and moisture down. Another little pro tip here about irrigation in the wintertime, you really want to make sure you're considering where your lines are and where they're going to freeze and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people have great irrigation systems where most of the plumbing is underground and you have frost-free hydrants, but remember to think about all your surface lines and that they might freeze, and you really don't want that to happen, because it's going to cause damage and then you're going to have a lot more trouble. So what I've done here and also at Raleigh City Farm is just put valves in a lot of places. I'm here at the end of one of my main lines. This is the line that runs along the ends of my tunnels. And so what I did here is I have a ball valve, and I have a ball valve at the end of each line. And so when I need to drain the water, which, you know, on days I need to water, you know, I have to drain it out after I'm done if it's going to freeze that night. So I close off the valve or the water coming from the house, and then there's another valve up there that just opens up into the air. And so what I do is I open these valves at the end of each line, and then the valve that's up near the house, I open that, and what that does is it allows air in, and that allows everything to drain out. And that has been super efficient. It only takes me a few minutes to either turn off the water and drain it, or close all the valves and turn the water back on. So it's these things that are repetitive over and over again: opening, closing tunnels, ventilating, making sure you have water when you need it, making sure you're draining lines. This has been really helpful, just putting in drain valves all around the farm. Making the decision on which crops to grow in the wintertime is definitely going to change the success of your farm in the winter. And there's a couple things you want to consider. I think one of the first things you always want to consider about which crops to grow is that you want to make sure that you're growing crops that you can sell. So if you're selling to restaurants, make sure you're talking to your chefs. Make sure you understand what they're looking for, especially in the wintertime as you plan ahead. If you are going to a farmer's market, try to figure out what is less competitive. What can you bring to the farmer's market that there isn't a lot of? And talk to your customers if you have good relationships with them, which hopefully you do, and see what they want. And so that will help dictate what you should grow. So, you know, if kale is, you know, something that people want, then grow kale. If people want collards, grow collards. If people want spinach, grow spinach. You know, there's a lot of options for winter crops. But on top of what crops you should grow based on the sales, you want to make sure you're growing crops that do well in the wintertime. So you're not going to be growing things like corn and tomatoes and you know, summer squash and stuff like that. Like, make sure you're picking stuff that's going to grow well in the cold weather. And a lot of that will depend on your climate and the infrastructure you have in place to protect your crops. For me, I have 3 crops I pretty much grow year round, which is lettuce, carrots, and beets. And in the wintertime, my sort of winter seasonal is red Russian kale, and we'll be switching that out in the spring for something else. So that's what I'm growing here, but make sure you're picking stuff that's going to be successful, because there's nothing worse than spending all this time and energy maintaining your crops, and especially in the wintertime when things are slow to grow. You want to make sure that things are going to be successful and you can get them out there and get some money for them. Having a good wash pack station is important to have at any time of the year on your farm to make sure that you're not wasting time and energy and labor, because you spend most of your time washing and packing vegetables, and anything you can do to make that a better process, I think, is super important. And I just recently did a video all about my wash pack station and how I designed it and how I use it. I'll leave a link down below for that video, so if you guys want to check it out, you can do that. And a lot of times wash pack stations, especially in the warmer months, you might have an area that maybe it's covered so you can get out of the sun and maybe out of the rain, which is great. But in the wintertime, that can be a problem, because if it's below freezing, you're obviously going to have trouble with water because lines might freeze and those kinds of things. Also, in terms of the work experience for whoever's doing the washing and packing, because when you're doing wet work, and it's super cold outside. Your hands get cold, and it's just kind of a miserable experience if you've ever had to do that. So anything that you can do to make that experience better is going to be good. And if it's a small farm, it's probably you doing the work, and in this case, it's me doing the work. So again, the experience of washing and packing, if you can somehow keep the space a little bit warmer, it's going to be greatly appreciated. I'm lucky that the wash pack here is in my garage, so I can close this door, and I have a little heater in here that I can just raise the temperature just a little bit. So even if it's super cold outside, I can come in here and wash and just have a better experience. And anytime that you can make the experience better, you're going to be more likely to want to do it. You'll be happier, and you'll probably get through the job a lot quicker. And in the summertime, again, I can shut the door, and I have a little air conditioner in here that I run just to bring the temperature down a little bit too. So again, not just having a good wash station, but make sure that it can handle being worked in the colder months. Planning and patience is a huge part of winter growing. Because crops grow so slowly, you have to have things planned way ahead of time, and of course you have to be very patient waiting for them to grow. Most of the stuff that you're going to be considering to harvest in the wintertime has to be planned out and maybe started in the late summer or fall, because as the days start to get shorter over the fall, things start growing really, really slowly. So even if you plant successions that are like 2 weeks apart, they might come ready 4 or 6 or even longer weeks apart. And so you really have to be patient with the way things grow, and you want to be really dialed into your production plan, because if you have a failure and you pull a crop and flip that bed and plant something else in there, it may not be ready till the spring. And so this tunnel, this is the third tunnel, my newest tunnel here, this was basically built so that I could have crops in that hunger gap, which is like that February to April time period where, you know, all the stuff planted in the summer and fall has already been harvested, and there really isn't a lot of fresh produce. So that's really what this whole thing was designed for, so that I could carry myself through into April and May when everything starts growing very quickly here. And so you really want to make sure you have a good production plan, and all the starts and all the direct seeding and all that stuff has to happen before the light levels get too low. And because if you put out crops that are either you're trying to get them to germinate in the winter time when it's super cold, or you're putting out little transplants and they may not handle the cold very well. So you want to make sure you have good established crops going into the winter time, especially if you're in a region that's colder than here. Here I can kind of plant stuff in the winter if I'm protecting it and taking care of it, but again, things grow really slowly and you have to have a lot of patience. I've really been enjoying winter growing so far, as I've embraced it as my main season. I enjoy working out in the cooler time. It's not even that cold right now. It's a very pretty warm day, but as opposed to in the summertime, and the crops just taste amazing, and the chefs absolutely love it. Those are my customers, because I think a lot of what I grow tastes better in the cooler months. So a lot of stuff here and a lot more to come, and there's a lot of pros and cons about winter growing that I'll share with you too. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you did, consider hitting subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.